entire life, and I'm so happy that it's happening. Why I was drawn to the occupation was because I was coming from Brown University and I was a sociology major, and I would just scream at my friends about how unequal things were and how wrong the democracy was and how everything was so corrupt and we had to have a revolution like yesterday. You know, we had to work on it. And they would just kind of look at my angry Facebook statuses and then brush me off and brush me aside. So when I first saw people who my own age talking about what could be done and how bad things were and just how grave the situation was, I was like, no way, I didn't think anyone who was young like me cared about stuff like this. That's impossible. And that's probably a different situation than here in Hong Kong, because just for my brief time being here, everyone is so engaged and it's really amazing. And you guys can do really transformational things here. So, I mean, we can anywhere, right? But just don't take that for granted because you can change a lot. So I saw young activated. People were coming out, all kinds of people. This just got louder. Okay, let's go to the next one. Just everywhere. So, and they were outraged, you know? They were, oh wait, I think you skipped one. Let me go back. Sorry. No, back again. Previous, maybe, I don't know where it is. I don't know where it is. Anyway, so this movement emerged, but I want to talk a little bit about how it first started. The summer before Occupy, there were a series, this was an occupation that was born out of democracy. It was born out of consensus-based decision-making. The entire summer before the occupation on September 17th, there were a group of people who would meet in Tompkins Square Park, which is a park in New York, and they would plan this occupation. They were answering a call from Adbusters, and they met the call and said, we are going to organize some kind of event for just the 17th, some kind of march, some kind of occupation, and we're going to gather a bunch of people and march on Wall Street. And so in those meetings, they developed a media strategy, they developed arts and culture, and planned for this occupation that was on the 17th. Now, here's a little known fact about the occupation. The day came, it was September 17th, maybe 2,000 people showed up. It was a Sunday, so nobody was in Wall Street. Nobody was there because it's a Sunday, right? So the newspapers would say, what a stupid thing, like all these kids are marching on Wall Street, it's a Sunday, what are they even thinking, right? And so the critique was immediate, right? And you guys should probably expect that as well from what I hear outside. The critique's pretty strong. But it's great, it's like familiar, you know, all the disruption. So they were just, they brushed them off easily. And a lot of people came to that event, and then a lot of people went home. But they went to this park, Zuccotti Park, that was just off Wall Street, and rather than have a plan, rather than really have anything worked out, they decided to break out into small groups and just talk about what's wrong with the world and what are we going to do about it. And so they would talk to each other, just talking to strangers, just talking about their politics and what was wrong, what was right, and what was so deeply, what radical change needed to emerge. And they decided, what can we do in this moment right here to change things? And most people had already left. This was hours later after the initial march. It was already kind of wound down. So they decided, let's stay. Let's stay. Maybe 20 people stayed in that park the first night. Just 20, not that many. And wow, what happened? You know, a huge movement happened. They just stayed and they just danced and they just sang and they talked about the world as it should be, and the police just kind of brushed them off as kids in a park. And then they were there the next day, and then they were there the next day, and then they were there the next day. And then they were marching and showing up at union events and showing solidarity with other struggles that were happening. And then the police repression came, and soon the crowds started coming, and you can go forward. And before you know it, there are massive crowds that are coming out to all of their organizations. All of the meetings, and a really big part of this was the way they got their word out. Because part of what was crucial about Occupy was that it had its own internal media. It had live stream, it had Twitter, it had social media, it had original media, and they told their own story. And I really think this is crucial because you can't depend or rely on mainstream media to tell your story, right? You have to tell your own story, and you have to make sure people hear it from you. You know, they can talk, they can vilify you, they can show, oh, these dirty hippies, but when you tune into live stream and see, you know, my friend Wayne, who just like really cares about things, how are you going to argue with that? You know, you're like, oh no, it's just a person, that's just a kid, I see myself in him. And that's what's so important about original media. It's what drew me in, and it's what drew a lot of people, and it's what made Occupy so findable. Obviously, what also made Occupy findable was that it was spatially located. You know, it was a space. All you had to do was go down to the park. You knew people would be down in the park, and you could just walk into that space. And unlike anywhere else in New York, you can talk to strangers. You can engage about politics. You can talk about what's wrong or what's right, and just bring yourself, bring your own opinions to this space and talk it out with people. And that, for me, also really drew me down, because I thought if so many people are coming from so many different positions in the world and they're all converging on this space, whatever comes out of that space is going to be amazing, right? They're crossing boundaries, they're listening to each other, they're sharing experiences, and they're working together to figure out what's right. So this is actually one of our big assemblies in Washington Square Park, also in early October. This is what I was looking for earlier. This is a picture of the original meetings. This is a small group of people who were actually planning the occupation before it turned into an international sensation. And they're just kind of stodgy kids sitting around a banner. And they don't really look like, you know, you wouldn't pass this and say, those are revolutionaries, you know, those are people who are going to change the world. But they changed the whole conversation in America, and it was just because they thought they could. So I think this is an important picture to remind people of what is possible if you just believe that change is possible, because they didn't have to believe they could do anything, but they did. Anyway. And so the first day that I went down to the park was Brooklyn Bridge Day, when 700 people got arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge, and this is a photo from that day. What's really important about this photo, I think, is that this photo was on newspaper covers, the cover of the New York Times, all over the internet, and I think people saw this woman and they saw herself in them. They saw someone who wasn't fighting the police, but who was exposed to the violence of the system, right? Somebody who wanted something so simple as a better world, and she was being arrested for it. And people ask themselves, well, why would she be arrested for that? That's such a simple, basic thing to want. So this is the first day that I went down, and this is what the park looked like. It was chaos. It was definitely chaos. And the tents were, it was a statement though, you know, there was arts and culture, and it was a prefigurative space, you know? It was a park, but it was so much more. It was a society, it was a better world. And I think that's a really important component about this occupation, was that it wasn't just a political movement. The reason people used consensus was because it was a prefigurative decision-making process, a process which considered many people, many voices, and people worked together, not like many kinds of democracy where you have two options, one winner, and it's competitive. So that was just one of many prefigurative elements about the occupation. We also had, this is what it just kind of looked like around. I mean, it wasn't always pretty, right? Many of the people who stayed at the occupation, who slept there every day, were kids who were already living on the street. In America, the situation for young people isn't very good right now. There's about 17% youth unemployment, and that doesn't even count the vast amount of young people who are underemployed or barely employed. And so a ton of people were just kind of already on the street, rejecting society as it was. And they found a home in the park. And I think that's a really important thing to mention because, and to show that it's not always pretty. Because the most transformational spaces are spaces that include the margins, right? The people who are blighted against, the people who don't have it easy in society, the people who aren't at the top, right? The people who are, you know, the immigrants, or women, or sex workers, or, you know, crust punk kids. And having a space where they were together with other people and there was a dialogue was immensely important. And I think was something that ultimately contributed to the true transformational potential of the space. So, as I was saying, Occupy was extremely prefigurative, right? So not only were we using these processes which kind of pointed to a better way the world could be, but we were providing services that the world should provide, right? We had a kitchen that fed people every single day, hundreds of people, and where the food came from, it was all over, but through generosity and through effort and through spirit and through working together, we were able to feed sometimes 1,000 people every 3 meals for 1,000 people every single day in the park. And this kitchen lasted long after the occupation ended. This was not just a 2-month thing. This kitchen lasted until March, at least, of the next year, 2012, every single day, at least providing dinner. And then it kind of closed down, but then it reemerged later when the network that had been Occupy reincarnated itself as a relief organization in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. We had a library. We had a fully functioning people's library. And you could check out books here. And they were stamped Occupy Wall Street, and you could just check them out and bring them back and learn. You could have free education and, you know, meet interesting people and have conversations. This was just one of many working groups, and people were in charge of this library. You know, they felt pride running this library because they're providing education, which, you know, you'll find more than the material things actually makes people feel fulfilled, right? Because it's providing, it's contributing, you're giving back to the whole world. Go to the next slide. We had sanitation. People living in a park is not pretty. It gets moldy. This was in October in you know, New York. It's rainy. We had snow. It was cold, but people still did it because it was important to them. And these are the heroes, really. You know, you can point at facilitation, you could point at press and PR and media, but these people did thankless jobs, you know, and they really felt like they were making a really good contribution to a good cause, and they were, because they kept us clean and healthy and sanitary. So these are the logistical things you have to think about when you have a large-scale occupation. I also should say that the organization for each of these groups, kitchen, library, sanitation, they were open, right? You could just join them. They were working groups and they would have a meeting, and so if you wanted to join the sanitation working group, you would just go to the meeting and they would tell you what you can do to help out, and then you'd be part of the working group, and then you can shape what the working group does and have your voice heard. So it wasn't just in our daily general assemblies that we were using really accessible consensus-based decision-making. We were also using it in our smaller functional working groups. This is the media working group. It was in the center of the park. From here was our entire social media organization, people would film protests and marches that would leave from the park and go out to Wall Street or go up to Union Square, and they would bring their footage back here. So it would be uploaded immediately onto YouTube, and people could see immediately in real time what was happening. We also had live stream operators, and those were phones that could just take video and it would be uploaded directly to the internet. So you could watch live what was happening. And between live stream and media, our stories got out. They just wouldn't have otherwise. Occupy really came into the national mindset after a video that was filmed went viral on YouTube of women getting pepper sprayed. I don't know if people have seen that, but without that video, without this component, nothing would have happened, right? It would have just been a small occupation in the park. So I really stress media because I think it's so important as far as a window to the rest of the people you're trying to get involved in your movement is concerned. That's how you communicate with them what you're about. We had arts and culture. Arts and culture was one of the first working groups, and they made it fun. They made it fun to be there. It's such a basic thing, right? But if whatever political movement you're part of isn't something you want to invite your friends to, or isn't something that you want to be at, then it's not going to be successful, right? It has to be something that people want to be at, people who want to be a part of. And arts and culture, you could laugh at them. They look ridiculous, right? But so many people got drawn in through the drum circle or through making signs and banners, and you just start by making a sign, and then before you know it, you're at the General Assembly, and before you know it, you're in a working group. And so it was really scalable. You can start as just an unaffiliated passerby and then get fully involved in the movement. So there was kind of a trajectory and a logic, even though it was a chaotic logic to all of this stuff. It was very chaotic. I cannot underestimate how chaotic it was. And something else happened there, and CK was talking about this as well, but people would suddenly find their voice, right? People who didn't feel heard by society would stand up, would talk about how they felt about things, and they would be listened to by so many people. And I can't even describe how empowering this is. You know, I saw so many people utterly transformed by, for the first time, being listened to, right, in a society that tries to shun you out and tries to disregard what you're saying. So the people's mic especially was really powerful for that, because I would say something and then all of you would repeat it, and that's the easiest way of feeling heard, right? Like, you're immediately heard because everyone just repeats back to you what you said. So that was really amazing. And these are the drum circles. And it was messy, you know. We had to go and fight City Hall because we were making so much noise with the drum circles. But it also was worth it to have an occupation that felt alive and had a heartbeat, right? So it's always going to be messy. Don't think it's not going to be messy. And you know, we had young people, old people. You know, it was mostly, we had celebrities and academic figures who all came down to the park and felt some kind of connection with each other. You know, it was a really beautiful, magical space. It really, there was no other space like it. We've never been to a space like this one. That's me. That's enough. Just pause right there. So I want to talk a little bit about facilitation, right? That's me. This is me. That's me 2 years ago. Yeah, my hair's grown a little bit. And facilitation is important because you are helping this all happen. You know, everyone's helping it happen. Everyone's helping it continue, from sanitation to kitchen to everyone. But when you're doing facilitation, you're actually helping these conversations happen, right? You're helping people talk to someone who's coming from a different perspective and a different worldview than they're coming from, which is, it's just immense. Like, I can't, doing that for someone is so, once you have a conversation with someone who you've never talked to anyone like them before, I don't think you can go back to being that person you were before. Put simply, right? It's true transformation. It goes one way, it doesn't go another way. And the more people build understanding for one another, the more people hold space for each other and other opinions. And consensus process helps this, the better we all work together. So that's why I gravitated towards facilitation, because I wanted to make this happen. This was actually after, well, there's a whole story with that one. I won't get into it. So I'll talk a little about the whole thing. So there was this is how facilitation was organized. There was a facilitation working group, because there were working groups that organized everything. And they met They would develop the agenda, which was based upon proposals that would come from other working groups or sometimes other individuals, but we preferred to have them come through working groups. And then we would build an agenda of different proposals, and then we would have an assembly every single night. And at first, the assemblies were quite small, maybe like 10, 20 people. By the time I was involved, they were hundreds of people every single night. And so massive crowds, multiple generations of people's mics. So I would say something and someone would repeat it, and then they'd have to get that repeated by someone else. And it took a long time, but it was so beautiful. And we would work through the agenda, and we would go through the whole consensus process, which we'll get into a little bit later. But even people who were coming by the General Assembly felt that their voices mattered. Like, they mattered to the decisions, you know, even if they were just stepping in. And that little moment of feeling like your voice matters in some decision sets people off on a different track. It really opens them up on a lot of stuff. So let me talk more about this. I'm like, let me just go really quickly. This is about kind of other dynamics in Occupy. So let me try to put this really quickly. Occupy was a very ambitious movement. It invited people from all walks of life in, and all those people brought their problems and their voices and their empowerment and their baggage from the world. And negotiating that was at first very easy and then got more difficult as kind of the ways we are made to disassociate from each other come to the forefront, right? The social ills that kind of plague any society. And so that happened. It was beautiful when I first joined, and it was still beautiful in a different way, but in a much realer way. When like people's real trauma starts coming into the fold, and negotiating and learning to deal with that drama is best done with consensus, is best done through community, and is hugely invaluable to figure out how to negotiate conflict, because a lot of societies shy away from conflict. So this doesn't always work. There are a lot of issues with consensus. There are a lot of difficulties, but you have to lay a solid groundwork. And I think we can talk about this a little bit more when we're talking about the actual workshop. But I do want to talk about the kind of wider implications of Occupy, because Occupy was determinedly not engaging in our current political process. And it did so because it didn't want to ask for things from that political system, because it saw it as fundamentally corrupt. And therefore, we had demands, but they weren't really of a political system to concede power. They were of each other and other people to build a better world and a better system. And people were very confused by that while the occupation was happening. People thought, oh, so you're not a political movement. Well, that's not true, because obviously the personal is very political, and everything we were doing was prefiguring a better world that had better politics, that was a better place to live in for everyone. So, unlike previous movements in the United States, like the Tea Party movement, which was hugely corrupted by corporate power, we didn't try to get representatives elected. We didn't try to use our strength through that venue. Instead, we targeted the cultural, because people engage with culture, especially in America, way more than they engage in politics. Maybe like 5% of people's time is spent actually engaging in politics, the average person, but culture's everywhere, right? And so we created a cultural movement that had transformation and created transformational spaces. And when they came and repressed us brutally, the entire government, which they did, which happens in movements, like repression happens, it really does. Those networks, those relationships stayed. And more than that, the discussions that we started were picked up by a wider, they were carried through in society, right? So any article you'll read today in the States will have a systemic analysis as opposed to just kind of a simple cursory analysis of what's wrong. You could look at the symptom and say, oh, there are a lot of poor people. What's causing that? I don't know. No, now you will actually have a relationship to the banking industry, the corruption in politics, and this has been going on for a couple of years now, right? As a result of this movement, because we influence the conversation as opposed to just the political bits of it, right? We could have run a politician for office, and then that politician could have been corrupted, and then where would we be, right? We would have wasted all this time trying to run one person for one position, and then have the overwhelming influence of money in politics corrupt that person. So now, what you see is a growing distrust in America towards their government, which didn't exist in the same way before. Before this systemic analysis began to take root in Occupy. I mean, it already existed, but it launched it into the stratosphere. And especially with all of the ways our government has been failing to operate lately, right? The shutdown that happened and was ridiculous. Our continued crises that we build upon each other that are totally manufactured, our just disregard for poor people in general that's really violent and disgusting. People aren't happy about it. People are disgusted by it, and especially the young generation, they recognize that their opportunities, their prospects are not what they were promised, and that their future, they have to take by the hand, by the reins, that they're going to really transform it. So, one more thing I'll say is that one of the strongest things about Occupy was that it created these prefigurative, transformative networks, which still exist today and are still mobilizing, and actually mobilized, if you go to the last slide, to build this entire recovery network, right? It mobilized in a day. In a day after the hurricane, we had this recovery network, and then one more slide, which was handling all these supplies to people in a week. In a week this happened. And we were the first ones who were there because we had the network, we had the resources, which were only each other. Those were the extent of our resources. We didn't have any money, we had each other. And we were able to be there for other people and show that there's a better way, right? That's not bureaucratized, that's not governmental, that really is just from one person to another or one community to another, that the ways we can help each other are so much stronger than what is usually trickled down and is supposed to be in our best interest, but almost never is. So I'm going to end it there from over time. And do we have time for questions a little bit? Some time for questions? Maybe not now. Okay, so if you have questions, sorry, hold on to them. I have a lot more to say. It's 3:20, and I'm going to go into a break right now.
我哋嘅佢嘅即係 set 個 stage 咧，就係 set 到而家啦。咁咧就我哋而家咧就我諗大家聽到呢度咧，就係應該都係好感覺到，其實真係 global village 係咪？佢頭先一路講嘅，大家有冇其實自己嘅經驗籌翻出嚟啊？你睇到佢哋嗰啲人嗰陣時，你記唔記得你自己其實係響我哋香港好多次大型活動裏邊，其實嗰度都有你啊？或者咧就係、我諗周庭應該都好感覺到嗰個 transformational space。之前咧未有反國教之前，我諗佢都係日日翻學放學翻屋企，或者係同啲書友仔玩下嘅啫，係嘛？但係而家咧佢日日都要出嚟做呢啲。但係咧，佢頭先講一句 ，You are not the same。其實大家呢幾年可能咧都覺得自己唔同咗，有冇呢個感覺咧？咁我諗即係最多人我諗好自然嘅朋友都係啊，係咪？同阿周平一樣係 transform 咗嘅。以前可能就翻工放工翻屋企煮飯或者咁嘅嘢，但係而家咧多咗嚿嘢啦。星期六、星期日咧好唔得閒，出得閒嘅時候。OK， 聽日咧都仲好唔得閒嘅。 或者咧，我有陣時都覺得咧，就冥冥中好似有啲嘢係會發生嘅。咁咧就如果今日咧陣間翻嚟之後，我哋有個 break， 大家翻嚟之後學咗一啲嘅 consensus making 咧，唔知聽日係咪就即刻可以試下嘅？OK， 嗱我就唔講多，我只係覺得咧 ，even if Nicole is only here now, we feel very familiar as if we are a family, because many of the things that she has experienced were experienced by people sitting here. 所以喺呢個時候咧，我想特別咧就係、其實香港都曾經試過已經係佔過中嘅噃，係咪啊？已經試過佔中嘅嘞噃。咁咧就佔中嘅搞手有冇喺度啊？即係所以佢哋唔係叫搞手咧，佢哋即係自己走埋嘅啫。如果佢哋唔喺度咧，我都最低限度請一個咧都有去過。咁雖然佢有第二啲嘢要做，唔可以長期佔領，咁就係可唔可以或者請大家上嚟啊？另外咧，我哋咧亦都係請另外一個協辦嘅團體學聯一齊咧，就係、大家上嚟講少少咧，就係協辦同埋咧聽到頭先嗰個少少嘅感覺，好嘛？5分鐘得唔得？學聯幾個一齊啊？We do have a mini Occupy syndrome that had happened last year already, and then while the majority of them are not here, we at least have one who have visited them. I was reminded about them， 對唔住啊，你即係搞手冇見慣，就係當佢話咧，就係佢哋咧見其中有一張 slide 㗎，係咪啊？就係話比較撈教啊，或者係咩？其實個撈教唔係個重點。個重點咧係原來咧，我都去過探班啊！佢哋咧係將所有嘅唔同嘅家私啊、唔同嘅喺街度執到嘅嘢咧，其實係可以喺嗰度咧係 create 翻個 space。咁所以當佢話 transformational space 咧，唔淨止我哋自己嘅心靈，唔淨止我哋自己嘅人，而係咧 space 都真係可以。咁啊，睇下陳樹輝講講你嗰陣時去到，你有冇幫手整下嗰啲 space 咧？
各位，
跟住一陣間先。
大家好啦，我顧嘅。咁係有啲奇怪嘅，如果我要講上一次嘅OC 嘅話咧，因為其實我都係只係即係類似係同我班自學系同學去觀察啦，究竟其實佢講緊嘢即係社會公義係啲咩嘢咧咁樣樣。咁但係我覺得咁又未嘅，又未至於去到。咁但係當然即係都思考某啲問題啦。但係因為其實上次 OC 同埋Occupy Wall Street 有個相似嘅地方，就係一啲關於我哋思考資本主義社會同埋我哋其實Occupy 嗰個象徵嘅意義嘅時候，其實我哋會思考好啦，我哋而家 Occupy 嗰個商業嘅價值，咁其實我哋 replace 一啲乜嘢嘅價值落去咧？咁我理解係嗰次同埋啱啱阿 Nicole 講嗰個類似嘅分別喺，即係咪嗰個相似同埋個分別喺度咯？咁但係即係如果講翻今日啦，即係譬如點解我哋學聯會今日都協辦呢一個嘅峰會咧，其實個原因好簡單嘅啫，就係因為其實我哋而家面對緊而家嚟緊嘅新一波民主運動，好似譬如話佔中咁樣講嘅時候咧，其實嗰個參與式同商討式嘅民主係十分之重要，因為其實大家我哋在座咁多位咧，都一定係追求民主嘅道路人嚟㗎啦。咁其實大家唔滿意政府成日騎劫我哋之餘咧，其實我哋都好唔滿意某一啲嘅可能係組織者過往嘅運動上面都有騎劫我哋嘅情況出現，譬如過往嘅學聯都係有咁嘅情況。咁所以呢一方面嘅嘢咧，其實我哋絕對係要喺呢一啲嘅討論嗰度嘅時候咧，其實要不斷去改進。譬如我哋上個禮拜咧搞完一個700幾人嘅商討嘅時候咧，其實當我哋開始咗呢個商討嘅過程咧，真係停唔到啦。個停唔到嘅原因，即係一方面可能同學想講更多，但係第二方面就係你只要俾你哋嘅群眾或者你哋嘅同學去參與嘅時候，你哋就要不斷去跟進翻佢哋所商討出嚟嘅過程。所以呢一個時候咧，就係我哋開始嘅時候，就點樣去不斷去改進我哋商討嘅模式咧？我哋點樣更加去 facilitate 到，甚至乎我哋點樣去真係做到同學俾我哋嘅意見？呢一個就係我哋嚟緊新一波民主運動喺香港嘅時候，其實我哋好關注呢一點。咁所以正正就係今日，譬如阿 Nicole 可能一陣間會講下，就係佢當年點樣做喺一個 mass movement 裏面嘅 facilitator 嘅角色嘅時候，其實我覺得嚟緊就係我哋要學呢一啲嘢。咁喺我哋可能喺大專界啦，咁但係當我哋真係萬一佔中嘅時候，其實每人都可以可能做啦呢一個 facilitator 角色，就係點樣促進緊成個民主運動嘅討論，從而成為我哋嘅行動嘅基礎咯。咁 所以就係其實民主唔單止淨係向一個政制，其實組織內部學聯乜鬼嘢組織到咧，其實都係要講內部嘅民主。咁而呢啲民主就係由商討開始。多謝。
OK， 大家咧就係要喐一喐啦。咁咧就不過咧就係 break 嚟嘅。咁但係 break 之前咧就大家唔需要擔心。我要話俾你聽咧就係其實我哋會有 Q&A 嘅，不過咧就唔係而家，而係話咧我哋想咧大家都實踐埋。你睇完佢嘅 demonstration， 大家都去實踐之後咧，我哋翻嚟嘅時候，亦都請阿陳健文博士咧就同我哋回應咗之後咧，嗰陣時我哋咧就會有一個咧就下晝嘅 Q&A session， 好嘛 ？OK， 咁而家咧就係3點搭半到啦，咁我哋咧就係會休息10分鐘，咁咧就係可以咧就係出邊有少少茶點。就同埋咧就係洗手間亦都係喺出邊就好近嘅啫嚇，咁就盡快咧響搭8嘅時候咧就請大家翻嚟啦，響翻。